The path toward becoming an empowered woman doesn't commence amid chaos or fanfare. It doesn't flourish beneath bright lights or get honored through accolades and accomplishments. Instead, it originates from a tiny fracture within her spirit, the instant she recognizes her existence has been steered by external demands and societal constraints rather than her genuine essence. Carl Jung termed this the initial conversation with one's inner being, where the real self starts tapping softly yet persistently. The woman finds herself no longer content with mere security as something deep within begins awakening, a longing impossible to define, yet impossible to dismiss. From this point forward, she undertakes a quiet expedition. No guidance, no designated stops. Only herself, the one individual she must courageously confront. These crucial moments receive little discussion because they possess no allure. They consist purely of anguish, acceptance, and transformation. Experiences only truly awakening women can comprehend. In this presentation, we'll examine 7 profound yet unspoken turning points a woman encounters during her return to authenticity through Carl Jung's philosophical lens. Continue watching, as this isn't merely another person's narrative. Perhaps you're currently navigating one of these pivotal moments without recognizing it. First milestone, questioning her assumed identities. The initial milestone occurs when she starts examining the characters she portrays. There exists an indescribable instant, unobserved and private, when a woman pauses within the very space she's considered sanctuary for years, suddenly understanding she no longer fits the identity the world has crafted for her. Not because it's damaged, but because it has crystallized like discarded serpent skin, constricted, fragile, devoid of life, and she intuitively knows her soul expands silently, yet can no longer remain imprisoned. Carl Jung labeled this the facade we construct from others' perceptions to gain acceptance, affection, and survival. However, Jung also cautioned, exist too extensively within that facade, and you'll forfeit your authentic identity. For women, this mask wasn't her selection. It was positioned upon her before self-awareness developed. Each good girl compliment, every approving look when she retreated, every acknowledgement for her quietness became another layer of concrete covering her original face. She mastered smiling without feeling it, agreeing without conviction, remaining gentle despite inner fire burning within her chest. She transformed into a statue sculpted by external forces, perpetually attractive enough, consistently pleasant enough. Eventually, these roles transcended mere disguises, becoming velvet restraints, soft yet restrictive. She continued moving forward, accomplishing admirable things, yet during solitary nights whispers emerged within her chest, like waves pounding against concealed cliffs. Is this genuinely my desire? Life gradually resembled a predetermined dream where she simply delivered scripted lines on cue. Then in a moment nobody else witnesses, she discovers she's forgotten her authentic voice. Like an actress imprisoned in identical roles for decades, performing until distinguishing between reality and performance becomes impossible. She might embody a confident leader, devoted mother, or perfect spouse, yet somewhere beneath that flawless image, part of her refuses to continue the performance. Not because the role is incorrect, but because it has concluded, and she's never been permitted to exit the stage. That awakening aspect Jung called the original self, unbowed by external gazes, undefined by labels, expectations, or obligations. This self doesn't arrive with fanfare, but returns like a gentle yet certain summons, like seedlings pushing through stone cracks, creating no noise yet possessing sufficient strength to shatter what no longer belongs. The initial indication is invisible discomfort. Praise once bringing happiness now feels hollow. Conversations previously providing joy now drain her energy. Relationships formerly serving as anchors now feel suffocating. Nobody comprehends what's occurring, including herself, yet deep within, she understands something has started fracturing. This isn't a midlife crisis or delayed rebellion. It's individuation's first step. When a woman begins recognizing she isn't what she's attempted becoming, she notices the disparity between her external self and internal truth. And this gap creates pain. Jung stated, "We encounter ourselves repeatedly in countless disguises throughout life's journey." Perhaps her true self appeared long ago through dreams, silent moments, or strange impulses, but she dismissed it to remain proper, measured, adequate. Now she begins hearing that voice again, though faintly, yet once heard, she cannot pretend deafness. Shedding the persona isn't impulsive. It's not discarding everything to become someone entirely different. It's a gradual, painful, courageous process where awakening truly begins. She's no longer the admirable woman requiring universal approval, but learning authenticity, even if disappointing the entire world. In that moment, she ceases being a role and becomes a question. In Jung's framework, every genuine question leads to rebirth. Second milestone, success loses its luster. As the mask begins cracking, something else emerges differently. Everything once craved no longer sparkles similarly. What previously accelerated her heart now feels like distant echoes, applause resonating in vacant rooms. Nobody has stolen her achievements. They remain present through wall certificates, email praise, and formal dinner congratulations, yet everything feels like gold paint over wax, shiny but cold and lifeless. Carl Jung called this the soul's awakening, a turning point in individuation's journey. For years, ego commanded direction, defining worth through measurable elements, reputation, titles, wealth, and admiration. However, ego lacks profundity, only understanding upward climbing, more, faster, until eventually the soul gently assumes control, asking, "Where are we heading? For what purpose?" During this phase, the woman doesn't collapse, but remains steady while faith in old frameworks begins wavering, like mountaineers reaching summits only to look around, realizing, "I've spent decades climbing mountains I never wanted to conquer." A vivid example is singer Demi Lovato, who achieved fame as a young Disney star. In a Teen Vogue interview, she shared, "I thought nobody cared. I was isolated, lonely, essentially miserable. I knew constantly they were cheering for a facade, and it felt empty." As a global star with millions of followers, Lovato felt trapped in stage personas she wasn't certain she wanted portraying. When she realized success no longer brought joy, that moment cracked her ego, and the self began knocking. In Jungian psychology, this represents silent internal warfare between ego and self. The ego constructed dazzling worlds, but the self craves truth, depth, and meaningful existence. Within that conflict, former driving forces become gilded burdens. She's uncertain whether continuing or releasing because everyone surrounding her still believes she's living dreams, yet she knows the dream is no longer hers. This sensation is real yet difficult articulating, not sadness or loss exactly, but like favorite songs no longer resonating within hearts. Though melodies remain perfect, voids begin forming, yet these voids don't arrive destructively, but to open new doors. Have you experienced such moments, when everything external remains polished, yet internally you no longer feel like you're living your own story? When light no longer warms and applause rings out but touches nothing within your heart? Jung called this the soul's desert, empty terrain where old patterns dissolve. The woman must confront emptiness beyond success, a crisis nobody taught navigating because nobody believed successful people could be lost. Yet within that emptiness, something sacred begins taking root. She starts distinguishing between achievement and meaning, between performing well and living truly, between the woman the world admires and the woman her soul quietly calls forth. This isn't regression, but when old consciousness dissolves, allowing new emergence, like potters smashing beautiful vases to shape true forms clay was meant becoming. Not because old vases weren't beautiful enough, but because they were never truly hers. From here, the woman begins understanding. Genuine light never dazzles but glows quietly, gently, burning from within, no stage required. She stops measuring life through applause, instead listening for what creates heart stillness through awe, not victory. Crucially, no longer seeing glory in success doesn't mean losing direction. It signals reaching new awareness levels where ego is no longer central and life begins revolving around what truly possesses soul. Perhaps this is when she truly begins succeeding, not in others' eyes, but in her own heart's quiet, honest gaze. Third milestone, confronting the shadow. When old glory fades, it doesn't leave clear skies but opens dark expanses where everything once avoided begins taking shape. In applause, praise, or clear goals' absence, she sees most clearly what she's spent life evading, darkness within herself. Carl Jung called it the shadow, not evil, but collections of all disowned parts, suppressed anger, unacknowledged envy, abandonment fears, control urges, silent screams of being overlooked. The shadow doesn't vanish through pretense. Contrarily, the more suppressed, the more energy gathered, waiting for mental cracks to surge forth like dark tides. For women, shadows don't arrive as external monsters, but as nameless emotions, inexplicable irritation with loved ones, strange dreams, urges to shatter stability, senses of no longer recognizing mirror reflections. It might be days when folding laundry and suddenly bursting into tears without reason, or yelling at children not because they were wrong, but because suppressing too much to be ideal mothers. Or avoiding partners' gazes, not because love diminished, but because no longer seeing themselves in their eyes. The shadow isn't the enemy, but the guardian of maturity's gate. Jung stated, "Until making the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you'll call it fate. If you don't face the unconscious, it will steer from shadows and you'll mistake it for destiny." She realizes that for years she's lived by burying wildest, fiercest, rawest parts to earn conditional love. But the cost is excessive. Nobody can step into authentic life without daring to face less than kind parts. At this stage, she no longer easily believes she's good or bad, but begins seeing she's both, capable of love and jealousy, forgiveness and unhealed wounds, gentle motherhood, and wounded inner children crying within. This realization isn't comfortable but truthful, and truth, however ugly, sets her free. Picture this phase as stepping into dark cellars without light, where each door leads to another version of herself, forgotten memories, humiliation moments she didn't dare resist, emotions forbidden because they weren't allowed. Sometimes she doesn't want continuing, yet in that very place she finds the child she once was, the person existing before learning pretense, before learning to live for love. She begins understanding nobody can walk through her darkness for her. No lectures, courses, or books provide precise guides. There's only one rule: stay with herself, even when what arises is anger, painful memories, suppressed desires, or truths that shouldn't be spoken. For in staying, darkness ceases being threatening and becomes guidance. Jung said, "One doesn't become enlightened by imagining light figures, but by making darkness conscious." Enlightenment doesn't come from dreaming of light, but from facing darkness and bringing it into light. She doesn't need eliminating dark parts, but recognizing, naming, and connecting with them. From that, suppressed energy releases, and she begins feeling whole for the first time. Strangely, within that darkness, she discovers strength she never recognized she possessed, a power that allows her to remain steadfast, without pretense, without needing to be pleasant, without constant correctness, remaining as a woman who is flawed, yet authentic to her essence. And that's the moment when shadows stop being an enemy and transform into the most holy aspect of her path toward growth. When she abandons pursuit of outside approval. Fourth point, when she abandons pursuit of outside approval. Remarkably, at that instant, a silent yet significant transformation starts to emerge. She no longer requires anyone's consent to recognize her value. It's not a defiant proclamation. It's not a rejection of society. It's a profound and commanding quietude, like an old oak that no longer bends to capture the breeze, for it has anchored itself solidly in its earth. Previously, every action in her existence carried somewhat the observation of others. She spoke appropriate words, performed correct actions, lived the acceptable manner, not because it represented her reality, but because it made others at ease, satisfied or content. Like glass reflecting solely the vision of those observing, she had never witnessed her genuine appearance when nobody was watching. Yet after completing the path of confronting her shadows, she no longer views being cherished as compensation. Sometimes it seems like the most delicate of bindings. Carl Jung once stated, "A person who has not journeyed through the fire of his desires has never conquered them." For a woman, it is through daring to confront her darkness that she stops being controlled by the terror of dismissal. And when that terror fades, so does the hunger for approval. Not because she no longer requires love, but because she no longer requires the stipulations connected to that love. It's like a vocalist who once performed to earn the crowd's affection, but eventually starts to sing because the melody insists on being sung, even if nobody hears. She begins existing by the inner voice, though that voice may occasionally oppose convention, hushed and seldom acknowledged. But it's at that instant that she understands she is genuinely existing, no longer a marionette mirroring society's demands. A clear illustration of this is Oprah Winfrey, a woman who once struggled with the necessity for outside approval to the extent that she famously declared, "As long as you're still concerned about what others perceive of you, you are possessed by them. Only when you need no consent from beyond yourself can you possess yourself." She discussed a youth characterized by absence of genuine love and emotional mistreatment, where every compliment, every burst of applause from an audience became a temporary remedy for her insecurity. At the peak of her achievement, every landmark, every word of recognition only intensified a deeper yearning, the necessity to be loved, to sense she existed. Through this journey, Oprah understood that exchanging her essence for approval was a subtle snare, and when she dared to stand and exist by her spirit's purpose, her impact became genuine and unshakable. In Jungian psychology, this represents the transition from persona to self. When a person ceases defining themselves through outside perspectives, she no longer needs to be adequate in her parents' view, reliable in her friend's view, or flawless in her partner's view. She starts to select silence when explanations aren't required, to refuse when her heart refuses, to retreat when she no longer feels like herself. This is not seclusion, but a peaceful kind of internal liberty. She still loves, still connects, but she no longer exchanges her essence to do so. It's like ending a dance to outside music and moving to the rhythm of the pulse in her chest. Some individuals may distance themselves from her, but that's no longer a catastrophe. It's the natural purification of the spirit. The desire for approval was once a spiritual dependency. Now she can exist without praise, without being comprehended, without being defended, because finally she had decided to stand on her side. This is the moment her individual will emerges, not as a rebellious child, but as a mature, awakened being who no longer gives the authority to define her to anyone else. She doesn't need to declare loudly to prove her value. She only needs to be present genuinely, and that presence, determined, unadorned, requiring no justification, is what makes her strangely reliable. People may not agree with her, but they perceive the truth in her, undistorted by the wish to be liked. If you're still on the path to discover your voice, remain with us. Content like this isn't meant to be heard and forgotten. It's here to remind you, there are women like you awakening. Press like or subscribe if you want to be accompanied further, most gently and truthfully. And then one day she reflects on all she did, just to be validated, and smiles without regret, knowing it's time to thank herself for daring to step out of that circle. This is one of those rare moments in life when you stop trying to be someone in others' eyes and begin to be yourself, even if no one applauds. Fifth point, when she encounters the inner guide. When she stops seeking external validation, the first thing that surfaces isn't peace, it's void. As if all this time she had traveled a route marked with signposts established by others. Now, with no one clapping, no one protesting, no one showing the way, she stands at a misty intersection where there's no chart, no one to tell her what's correct, proper, or suitable. But it's in that precise moment that a new voice starts to speak, gentle, faint, but undeniable. Jung named this the inner guide, a vivid symbol in the unconscious representing fundamental wisdom, the archetypal spirit that every human carries within. For a woman, it might manifest as the wise elderly woman, the inner mother, or a mature version of herself she never believed she could become. This voice murmurs in moments of calm, between breaths, in a restless night, or a strange morning dream. It doesn't order, but it understands who she is and where she's heading. Carl Jung explained this as the emergence of the archetype in the process of individuation. When the masks, the shadow and the ego have been acknowledged, the ancient archetypes in the unconscious begin to reveal themselves. This is the part that understands the way when the conscious mind is still confused. A understanding not from books, but from the depths of the spirit, accumulated through thousands of generations. This awakening can come from the women around us. Not famous, not authors, not powerful, perhaps a mother who has just experienced a divorce after over a decade of marriage. She doesn't wail or resent, but the days following the separation are eerily quiet. Around her accumulate empty platitudes. Keep going, be strong for the children. And she, as always, smiles and nods, until one evening, washing dishes in her small kitchen, hearing the steady drip of water while her children sleep, she feels a pervasive loneliness that is no longer frightening. In that emptiness, a thought flashes, not quite words, but a clear sensation. I've survived everything I thought I couldn't, and I'm still here. It's not a delusion. This is an inner anchor rising from her deepest core, stronger than anything external that ever gave her a sense of safety. From there, she doesn't transform overnight, but she begins organizing her home with a different attitude, as if reclaiming her territory for herself, not just maintaining order for others. She enrolls for a class she missed in her youth. She no longer seeks approval to move forward, but starts trusting that quiet voice whenever the outside world falls silent. Encountering the inner guide isn't like finding someone to ask, "What do I do now?" It's about beginning to trust that something within her is still okay, even when everything outside crumbles. It's making decisions based on intuition, feeling, and a deep alignment with her essence rather than reputation, others' opinions, or fear of being wrong. She begins to feel guided not by anxiety, but by a vague yet strangely reliable clarity. For instance, she changes her career without a clear plan, or declines a proposal without a solid reason. That's when the inner guide is holding her hand like a small lantern in a deep forest, shining just enough for the next step, but never going out. Jung said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." When a woman stops looking outward for guidance, she begins to awaken by looking within. And the guide then comes not from gods, experts, or anyone else, but from the sacred seed she has carried since birth. This is a turning point no one sees but changes everything. From here, she no longer asks, "What do others think?" but "What within me is stirring?" She stops living as a reaction to life and begins creating life from the inside out. Perhaps at this moment you're feeling that what's happening in your heart matters more than the content playing. And that's good, very good. This is a space not for quick understanding and quick forgetting. It's a place to truly pause and listen. What within you has just been touched. If you feel the need, pause the video, Close your eyes, place a hand on your heart, and ask ever so softly, what do I need most right now? Then let the question settle without rushing to answer. Sixth point, when she learns to love herself, including the imperfect parts herself, including the imperfect parts. Being true to the inner voice is like opening the door to a house locked shut for years. Fresh air rushes in, but so does the dust, the musty smell, and the old wreckage. She cannot choose only the light in this return. The closer she gets to herself, the clearer she sees the broken pieces that have long been swept into an invisible corner. And here lies the greatest challenge of individuation. Can she reach out, lift the parts she was once ashamed of, once despised without turning away? Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." Loving the beautiful parts is easy for anyone, but loving the irritating, mistaken, wounded, raw, unstable parts is a journey not for the hasty. The woman who once tried so hard to be accepted by others now faces a more essential question. Can she accept herself unconditionally? This doesn't happen overnight. It doesn't come from motivational speeches or a love yourself quote printed on a teacup. It comes from mornings of waking up late, seeing a messy house, an imperfect body, failures that can't be blamed on anyone, and not hating herself for it. She no longer reflexively hides from those parts. Instead of thinking I must be better, she begins to think I am still worthy of love, even when I'm this unraveled. Consider a woman after childbirth who has just given life to a new soul, and at the same time is touching a profound threshold of transformation within herself. Her body is no longer something she can control as before. Hormones ebb and flow like tides. Stretch marks, swollen breasts, a widened waist, all silent testaments to a transition both sacred and brutal. But the external changes are only the surface. The greatest collision happens within, where an identity built on agency, control, and competence now faces unprecedented uncertainty, chaos, and fragility. Once she was the model woman, mastering emotions, managing energy, even knowing how to appear radiant in crisis. But now, after sleepless nights, tears falling for no reason, and looking in the mirror without recognizing herself, she stands at a crossroads. Continue playing the role of strength, or sit down and admit she's falling apart. When she dares to stop avoiding, to stop holding it together, her body and mind soften like earth after rain, soft to breathe, to accept, to stop fighting herself. When a postpartum woman learns to look at her changed body without disdain, to face her wavering emotions without shame, she begins a form of self-love she has never known. A love without conditions, without edits, without needing anyone's approval. She stops trying to go back to who she was. For a deep part of her understands she will never be that person again, and that is not a loss but a birth. This acceptance doesn't make her complacent. On the contrary, it frees her from the burden of always needing to be perfect. She no longer measures her worth by her weight, her patience, or what she accomplishes in a day. She begins to measure it by how truly present she is with herself. And when she can be present with her mess, her chaos, her lack of control, she knows she is becoming a mother, not only to her child, but to herself. If you're going through a phase like this, before moving on, take a quiet moment and breathe slowly. This stillness isn't for solving or overcoming. It's for acknowledging that some things only begin when we stop trying to return to who we were. Jung emphasized wholeness is not about becoming perfect, but embracing all the light and dark within. Like the mandala, a circle of inner unity. From here, she no longer acts to prove, lives to be forgiven, or strives to fit an image. Every step, every choice, every mistake is met with eyes of understanding. No longer splitting herself into good or bad. Only a complete human remains beautiful, flawed, steady, broken, but whole. When she returns to the world to serve, seventh point, when she returns to the world to serve, each time she chooses to stay with her imperfect parts, another layer of old armor falls away. She doesn't become more perfect, she becomes more real, And when that reality is strong enough to stand unshaken by others' gazes, she realizes she no longer needs to hide in the room of healing. She is whole enough to open the door and step out, present as a source that has rediscovered its flow. At this moment, a new urge arises. It's not a craving for validation, not a need to prove herself, nor a fear of being left behind. It's something deeper, quieter, yet more powerful. She wants to bring her whole self back to the world to serve. Carl Jung described individuation as not ending when one becomes oneself, but when that self is brought back to the collective, like a fire-bearer returning from a deep cave. For someone who has fallen into darkness, crumbled, lost her way, yet chosen to keep going, her very presence becomes a healing light for the world. This woman doesn't return wearing her old armor. She no longer needs it. Now she can show up anywhere. A meeting, a yoga class, a cafe, a hospital corridor, a family dinner with a stillness that others feel. Even if she says little, the stillness of someone no longer trying to be anyone else. Every word she speaks, every action she takes, no longer stems from should, but from what truly matters to me. And that creates an energy that makes those around her wonder. Am I living true to myself? Like a bell that no longer needs the wind to ring, her mere presence is enough to make others pause. She doesn't seek to lead, yet people come to her just to be near someone who has truly come home to herself. In Jungian psychology, this is the final circle of the inner hero's journey. The return, where the hero brings the treasure found in the unconscious back to the collective. But this woman's treasure isn't knowledge, solutions, or skills. Her treasure is her state of being, the ability to be present without retreating, to love without possessing, to listen without trying to fix. And that is exactly what the world lacks. It could be the elderly nurse in the recovery room, always calm, her eyes and gestures easing patients' fears, allowing them to exhale after panic. She may have swallowed tears through countless seasons of life and loss, and that is why she no longer fears others' pain. She can stand beside it without flinching. That is service. Or the woman who starts a business after a personal crisis, having endured years in an ill-fitting environment. It's not ambition, but a desire to create a workplace where people matter more than results, where employees can say, "I disagree," without judgment. She no longer builds to climb. She builds to nurture what she believes is right, and people feel that difference. In the Jungian sense, service isn't sacrifice. It's not about self-neglect. True service is when you are so full within that you no longer need to take from others. And your presence itself becomes a gift. It's acting without fear, giving without expecting return, showing up without trying to save anyone, just being truly present. By no longer offering the world a polished, beautiful version of herself, she sends an invisible yet powerful message. You don't need to be perfect to have value. You just need to be you. And little by little, other women begin to shed the armor they once thought indispensable, becoming their truest selves. When this woman returns to the world, conclusion, not with fanfare or banners, but with the quiet presence of a lake after the ice melts, something in the air shifts. She is no longer a blazing fire or a towering monument. She is like embers in an old hearth, glowing steadily, not dazzling, but warm enough to make those nearby breathe easier. For the deepest gift a woman who has walked this inner journey can offer the world is not advice or experience, but the energy of living authentically, like a primal forest, uncreated, undesigned, yet stepping into it, you feel a dense, raw, wild, yet orderly life. Her presence is the same, and that makes her an invisible refuge for those weary of searching for themselves. The world doesn't need another perfect woman. It needs one who dares to accept her imperfections, yet chooses to love, to act, to say no when needed, and to open her arms when she can. Not to be great, but to be human. If you're somewhere on this journey, confused, alone, doubting yourself, Remember, some sacred things don't ring like bells, but pulse steadily beneath the silence, like a heartbeat. And one day you'll realize those slow, uncheered steps were the deepest path back home.